The wind from the Atlantic lashed against Maine's rocky shore, carrying the sharp scent of salt and the roar of waves crashing violently against the pier. Lying abandoned there was the USS Providence, a rusting World War II hospital ship, decommissioned and sold off by the U.S. government for just $9,000. Locals scoffed, saying it was worth nothing more than scrap metal. But Claire Donovan, a young mechanic with a garage on the brink of collapse, saw in it her last chance. And when she cut through a welded wall below deck, Claire didn't find steel to salvage. She found hundreds of crates of wartime relics and a legacy powerful enough to change her life forever. Here's the faithful American English translation of your excerpts, rendered with correct grammar and natural flow without adding or omitting details. The roar of a power drill echoed from Claire Donovan's small garage, carrying down the narrow street of the main harbor town. The roll-up door was rusted, the walls stained with oil, and the faded sign creaked as the sea wind shook it. Inside, Claire, her hands smeared with grease, was bent over tightening the final bolt on an old pickup truck. Her customer, Mr. Harris, a silver-haired veteran who had once served in the U.S. Navy, sat waiting, his eyes distant as though staring straight through the dust and smoke of the garage. When Claire wiped her hands and handed him the keys, he smiled. "Thank you, Claire. You know, I once served on a hospital ship. Those ships didn't just carry the wounded, they carried hope." Claire nodded, hiding a weary sigh. Her garage held little hope left. The stack of electric bills grew higher each week. Customers were scarcer by the day, and her younger brother Kyle, only 15, still needed money for school. Since their father's death in a shipyard accident, the burden had been hers alone. Her father, an Irish immigrant and mechanic, had always told her, "When something breaks, please don't throw it away. Learn how to fix it." That evening, Claire ate a packet of instant noodles under the weak yellow light, scrolling absently on her battered phone. A government auction notice popped up on the screen. Decommissioned WWII hospital ship USS Providence, starting bid $9,000. Buyer must tow, she chuckled. Who in their right mind would pay for a hulking mass of rust? But her finger froze when she read the details. The USS Providence had carried the wounded after Pearl Harbor and later served at Iwo Jima. This wasn't just steel, it was history. Kyle walked in and saw her staring at the screen, his brow furrowing. "Don't tell me you're thinking of buying that ship. It's only $9,000, Kyle. Just the scrap alone could pay it back. This might be our chance to save the garage." Kyle's eyes widened. $9,000, that's rent money, tuition money. We can't even tow a wreck like that. You're dreaming. Claire set the phone down, wiped her hands on her apron, and spoke slowly but firmly. "Dad always said, when something breaks, you fix it, you don't give up. I'm not giving up on this garage, Kyle. This is our last chance." The boy stormed upstairs, leaving Claire alone with the sound of the wind howling off the sea. In her mind, Mr. Harris's words, her father's grease-stained hands, and the image of a hospital ship saving soldiers all came together into one decision. 2 days later, Claire stood at the pier. The USS Providence loomed there, listing its hull scarred with rust, steel plates clattering in the wind. Townsfolk shook their heads, whispering, "That Donovan girl's crazy again, poor and still playing big." Claire ignored them. She signed the papers, transferred the money, and took the deed. When her calloused hand touched the freezing rail, it felt like laying a hand on a forgotten chapter of history. No one believed it, but Claire knew the ship still had a story to tell. On her first day aboard the USS Providence, Claire felt like she was stepping into a floating hospital swallowed by time. The ocean wind whistled through corroded steel seams, carrying the briny scent of salt and the faint sting of old disinfectant that clung to the walls. Each step she took echoed with a creak like whispers from the past. She carried a flashlight, a notebook, and an old metal detector borrowed from a friend at the shipyard. She told herself to just treat it like any other salvage job, though her heart pounded as if it already knew she was walking into something far greater. On the upper deck, broken chairs lay scattered. Windows cracked and faded black and white photographs clung to the walls. Claire shone her light across the images, an American doctor in a blood-stained white coat, a young nurse pushing a stretcher, wounded soldiers lying motionless. The photos had faded, but their eyes still seemed alive, staring at her. Moving into the middeck, Claire stepped onto a rotten panel. Her foot gave way and she lurched forward, nearly tumbling down a rusted stairwell. She caught herself on the railing, heart hammering. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "When something breaks, don't throw it away. Learn how to fix it." Steeling herself, she took a deep breath and pressed on. Down near the engine rooms, the metal detector suddenly beeped frantically. Claire frowned, sweeping her flashlight until it fell on a welded wall section. The seams were crude, nothing like the original construction. She rapped it with her knuckles. A hollow echo answered back. There was space behind it. "There's something here," she murmured, her hand trembling. She hauled her garaged old cutting torch onto the ship the next day. The sparks flew like fireworks, the acrid stench of burning steel filling the air. Each groan of metal falling to the floor shook the deck beneath her boots. Claire bent down and aimed her light inside when the hole was wide enough. A chill draft brushed against her face, strangely cooler than the air outside. Crawling through, she found herself in a hidden chamber no bigger than her garage, its walls reinforced with thick plating like a vault. Her flashlight beam swept across rows of wooden crates stacked neatly. Dust caked so thick it puffed into clouds when disturbed. Some were still bound with iron straps, others bore faded pencil marks. Claire wedged her crowbar under the lid of a small crate and pried it open. Inside lay a cracked leather-bound journal. On the cover, USS Providence, 1944. She flipped through a few pages. Slanted handwriting recorded surgeries, names of soldiers, and dates matching key battles. Another crate held bundles of unsent letters, envelopes stained with blotches of dried blood. The next revealed purple heart medals, pocket watches, and handkerchiefs embroidered with names. Claire froze, her hands trembling. She hadn't uncovered scrap metal. She had unearthed a buried archive of war memories, hidden for over half a century. In the silence, she whispered, her voice shaking, "Oh God, I've just touched history." The beam of Claire's flashlight flickered across the sealed room until it caught on something strange in the corner. An old film projector caked in dust, its body still bearing a faded label, U.S. Navy Medical Unit. In front of it, a yellowed silver screen still hung neatly, as though waiting for someone to switch it on after decades. Her heart pounding, Claire hesitated for a moment before turning the knob. The lamp flared, the engine rattled, and black and white images trembled onto the screen, a cramped operating room aboard the ship. Doctors and nurses rushed frantically, gloves stained with blood, wounded soldiers crowded onto stretchers. Distant explosions thundered from the sea, shaking the frame violently. The camera stilled on the face of a man in his 50s, hair flecked with gray, eyes sunken and ringed with fatigue. His white coat was smeared with blood. He stared straight into the lens. His voice hoarse but clear, "If anyone finds this film, we are likely already gone. This is not a weapons cache. This is a memory room. We preserved letters, journals, and belongings of those who will never return. Do not sell them. Protect them, tell their stories so they will not be forgotten." The projector clattered for a few more seconds and then died, plunging the chamber into darkness. Only the distant crash of waves and Claire's pounding heartbeat remained. She stepped toward a large wooden crate, running her fingers across the lid. Chalk letters appeared under the flashlight's beam, sealed 1945, Order 17. Claire vaguely recalled that near the war's end, the U.S. Navy had issued orders to seal away sensitive documents to keep them from falling into enemy hands. Perhaps this room had been locked since then, forgotten once the ship was decommissioned. Claire pried open another box. Inside lay a folded letter, paper yellowed, ink blurred. She read the first line and her throat tightened. "My dearest Anna, if you are reading this, it means I did not return." She clutched the letter, a sharp ache piercing her chest. This wasn't just a relic. It was a husband's final words to his wife, words never heard. She opened another small crate, embroidered handkerchiefs, pocket watches etched with names, purple heart medals stacked neatly. Each item was a soul suspended in steel. Claire sank to her knees on the cold floor, tears sliding down her cheeks. The doctor's words from the film echoed in her ears, "Protect them, tell their stories." She raised her light, sweeping it across the chamber. Hundreds of crates loomed above her, like hundreds of silent eyes watching, waiting. In that instant, Claire understood this was no treasure to be sold for debt. This was a cemetery of memory, and somehow it had been entrusted to her, an unknown mechanic to guard. Choking back a sob, she whispered to herself in the darkness, "I cannot break this promise, not ever." Claire still hadn't told anyone 3 days after discovering the memory room. Her only secret companion was the leather journal in her backpack. At night, she spread an old blanket on the deck, trying to sleep to the lull of the waves. But the image of the doctor from the film returned repeatedly, along with his plea, "Protect them, tell their stories." That morning, while cutting away rusted steel sheets to keep up the pretense of salvage, she spotted 3 men standing on the pier. They didn't look like fishermen, dark suits, polished shoes, eyes cold as iron. One stepped forward with a thin smile. "You must be Donovan, the new owner of the USS Providence." "Yes, is there a problem?" "We work for an organization that handles national property. We hear you've been inside the ship. If you found anything unusual, it would be best to report it." His tone was calm, but the threat in it was unmistakable. Claire clenched her grease-stained fists and answered flatly, "I bought it for scrap, there's nothing unusual." The man smirked, slipped a business card with only a phone number into her hand, and walked away. That night, Claire tossed in uneasy sleep. Around 3 in the morning, her homemade alarm shrieked. She bolted upright, grabbed her flashlight and crowbar, and dashed below deck. The steel door had been forced open and the lock snapped. Her beam caught the fleeting shadow of someone slipping down the corridor. A crate had been dragged out, its lid pried open. Inside, empty, Claire collapsed to her knees, trembling hands pressing against the hollow box. It wasn't just an object stolen, it was someone's memory. A wave of guilt hit her hard. She had already failed the promise. The next morning, things grew worse. A photo of the USS Providence surfaced on Twitter, captioned in bold, "Treasure ship in Maine." Comments poured in by the hundreds. "Is there gold inside? I heard it's wartime secrets. The government will take it back." Reporters swarmed the harbor. Cameras shoved into Claire's face, drones buzzed over the deck, flashes strobed with every step she took. Locals whispered on the sidelines, half curious, half mocking. Does she think she's Indiana Jones? She'll be shut down soon enough. Desperate, Claire called the police, reporting the break-in. The desk officer's voice was indifferent. Do you have evidence? If not, there's nothing we can do. She hung up and slumped onto the deck, burying her head in her hands. For the first time, she felt truly cornered. The ship was no longer a chance to save her garage. It had become a battlefield, her alone against unseen hands closing in. In despair, Claire pulled out the leather journal and scrawled 2 words on a blank page: protect Tell. It was the only thread keeping her upright as the storm gathered around her. After the break-in, Claire knew one thing: she could not protect the ship alone. Those men in suits would return, and next time, they might not stop at just one crate. She first thought of Professor Howard, a retired naval historian living in an old wooden house near the harbor. He had once been a close friend of her father's, often stopping by the garage over the years just to change his oil, sip weak coffee, and recount stories of war. Claire remembered one thing he had once told her: hospital ships didn't just carry the wounded, they carried souls. That afternoon, Claire brought him the leather journal she had found in the sealed chamber. Howard turned each page carefully, his aged hands trembling. Tears blurred his vision behind thick glasses when his eyes reached the list of soldiers' names. Good Lord, this is real, not a forgery, not some collector's trinket. This is memory gold, Claire. She swallowed hard, her voice catching. So what do I do? Howard looked at her squarely, his expression both anxious and proud. If you stay silent, they'll take it. If you sell, it will vanish. There's only one way: go public, but with the right place, the right people. A few days later, Howard brought Claire to a small veterans bar near the harbor, where men who had served in World War II, Vietnam, and even the Middle East gathered. The cramped room was thick with smoke, and country music twanged faintly beneath the rasp of rough laughter. Howard introduced Claire and gave a brief account of the discovery. The room fell quiet. A dark-skinned veteran slammed his hand on the table. If it's real, then it belongs in a museum. How long can a kid mechanic protect something like this? Another man, Latino, shook his head. If the government takes it, it'll just rot in another locked archive. Our grandchildren will never see it. An argument erupted. Some demanded it go to a museum, others insisted it stay in the community. Claire sat silently, her hands clenched, listening to the clash of voices like waves battering a ship's hull. Finally, a short-haired female veteran in a khaki jacket stood, her voice sharp and steady. Girl, if you've got the guts to keep this ship, we'll help you, but you must promise no selling, no letting these memories be buried again. Claire rose to her feet, eyes brimming, her voice unwavering. I promise. That night, the group of veterans boarded the ship with her. Howard brought a magnifying glass, a UV lamp, and a few tools for verification. They examined each letter, checked watermarks, and tested ink. The results were precise. Everything matched the 1940s. One elderly veteran's hands shook as he recognized his comrade's name etched on an envelope. He clutched the letter to his chest, tears streaming down his face. I thought this memory was gone forever. Watching him, Claire felt her heart swell. She no longer felt alone. For the first time since stepping onto the USS Providence, she had allies now, people ready to help her turn a rusted ship into a beacon of memory. News of the USS Providence spread like wildfire. Within days, images of the rusted ship appeared across history forums, veterans' Facebook groups, and even Reddit. The headline, "Memory Ship in Maine, Real or Hoax?" became a trending topic. For Claire, the attention hit like a crashing wave. One afternoon, she sat in a harbor cafe, trying to type up entries from the journal for her blog to share with the community. But just as her finger pressed publish, her laptop screen went black. When it flickered back on, every word was gone, replaced by a line in glaring red: "Stop before it's too late." Claire looked up, her stomach twisting. Outside the window, a lone black SUV idled, its headlights fixed on her like the eyes of a predator. Professor Howard appeared beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. This means they've shown their hand, but if you stop now, everything will stay buried forever. Claire drew a deep breath, borrowed the cafe's old computer, and began to type again. Every keystroke felt like a hammer blow this time. This is not treasure, this is memory, and it belongs to the families of the fallen. She hit publish once more, her pulse racing but her eyes steadier than ever. Just days later, Claire received a court summons. A private corporation, calling itself a Heritage Preservation Unit, filed suit under federal property statutes, claiming Claire was unfit to preserve national heritage. Kyle slammed the document on the table, his voice rising in panic. You can't win this. They've got money, lawyers, the government on their side. Claire's face stiffened, but Howard was ready. He contacted veterans groups. Before long, a young attorney, a volunteer advocate for veterans, stepped forward to freely represent Claire. In the counterclaim, she wrote plainly, "These memories belong to the families, not for sale." The first hearing came quickly. Claire wore her faded blue work shirt, standing before the judge, hands trembling but her voice clear. "I didn't buy this ship to make money. I only want to do what's right, return these memories to their rightful families." Outside the courthouse, dozens of veterans gathered, holding hand-painted signs, "Protect our memories and this ship carries our brothers." Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing nonstop. The story exploded across national television. News anchors dubbed Claire the small-town mechanic taking on power. Online, the hashtag memory ship became a movement. Thousands signed petitions demanding that the USS Providence be protected. That night, Claire returned to the ship. The sea wind howled as though testing her resolve. Kyle came out to stand beside her, silent for a long while, then whispered, "You're crazy, but this time I'll be crazy with you." Claire turned, smiling through her tears, their hands clasped tightly. Ahead lay a lengthy legal battle, but Claire knew one thing. The memory ship would not go down without a fight. Claire decided not to wait for a verdict. 1 week after the first court hearing, she organized a small gathering with Professor Howard on the deck of the USS Providence. No stage, no television lights, only the ocean wind whipping across the railings. A few rows of folding chairs and wooden crates lined up along the aisle. Claire opened a small crate and pulled out a yellowed envelope as the sun dipped low. 90-year-old Martha, frail and trembling, stepped forward. Claire placed the letter in her hands. The older woman unfolded it and read in a quavering yet steady voice, "My dearest Anna, if you are reading this, it means I did not return." The words tore through the silence. The deck fell utterly still, broken only by the steady crash of waves. Young people bowed their heads while veterans quietly clasped each other's hands. Tears streamed down Martha's wrinkled face. But she smiled. "At last, after 70 years, I finally hear his words." Kyle stood behind, hands stuffed into his pockets. He looked at his sister, then at the older woman clutching the letter to her chest. For the first time, respect flickered in his eyes. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Claire's shoulder. "I get it now. This isn't reckless. This is legacy." Choked with emotion, Claire pulled her brother into an embrace. Every quarrel, every accusation between them dissolved. Now they stood united in one mission. That evening, relics were returned to families one by one. A Purple Heart medal went to the grandson of a soldier who had fallen at Iwo Jima. A pocket watch engraved with a name was placed into the hands of a young mother who whispered to her daughter, "Remember, sweetheart, this is why we exist." Many families volunteered DNA samples to confirm identities, making the returns accurate and transparent. Each tear, each embrace transformed the ship's deck into a place where memory came alive again. News of the ceremony spread quickly. The Smithsonian sent a letter of congratulations, offering technical assistance to preserve the artifacts. The local government, once skeptical, officially recognized the USS Providence as a living memorial. Hundreds of local high school students climbed aboard the ship on Veterans Day. They stood in a circle, reading the names recorded in the soldier's journal aloud. Their youthful voices rose against the sea breeze. A simple yet sacred chorus. Claire stood at the rail, her hand gripping the cold metal, her heart burning warm. She was no longer just a poor mechanic struggling against bills. She had become the keeper of memory for an entire generation and the one who would pass that flame to the next. Above the Maine coast, the sunset burned crimson, gulls wheeling in the sky. Claire whispered, as if promising her father and all the resting souls, "Memory will never be forgotten." The Maine harbor glowed under the evening sun 1 year after the ship was saved. Townsfolk pitched tents, brought cakes and grilled food, and children ran laughing with little white paper boats. On the deck of the USS Providence, now partially restored, Claire Donovan stood before hundreds. She wore her familiar faded blue work shirt, stained with grease, nothing glamorous, only true to herself. She drew a deep breath, her voice carrying steadily over the sea wind. "When I bought this ship for $9,000, everyone thought I was crazy. Truth is, I thought I'd just sell the steel to save the garage. But when I opened that sealed door, I realized I had been given a responsibility, not just to fix a ship, but to fix memory." The crowd was silent. Claire went on, her eyes shining with conviction. "My father, an immigrant mechanic, taught me, when something breaks, don't throw it away, learn to fix it today." I want to say memory is the same. It may be torn, forgotten, but we can fix it by sharing, by remembering. Thunderous applause rolled across the pier like waves. After the speech, families released paper boats into the sea. Each carried a short message: "Don't forget, we are still here." Hundreds of glowing lights floated on the waves, shimmering like souls gently carried home. Kyle stood at his sister's side, no longer skeptical or bitter. He smiled and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Claire." At that moment, a postal worker delivered an envelope stamped with the U.S. seal. Inside was a brief letter from the president. "What you and the Maine community have done is proof of what makes America. Memory, courage, and faith. The USS Providence will forever stand as a beacon of memory for generations to come." Tears welled in Claire's eyes as she held the letter, not for her glory, but for the recognition of all the unknown souls who had sacrificed everything. From then on, Claire kept her small garage, but on the deck of the USS Providence. She opened a community workshop. Students came to learn mechanics while also hearing history told through artifacts. Veterans volunteered as guides, bringing memories alive for the next generation. The ceremony closed with the national anthem. A local band struck up the tune, and the American flag snapped proudly in the ocean wind. Claire lifted her gaze, her eyes alight. In that moment, she understood fully she had not only saved a ship. She had transformed it into a beacon of memory, a symbol of the American dream. From poverty, From despair, a small-town mechanic had become the guardian of heritage for an entire community. Heritage isn't what we keep. Heritage is what we share.